Welcome to the All for Literacy podcast, hosted by Dr. Liz Brooke, welcoming established and emerging voices in literacy education and the science of reading. Explore with us the connections between literacy research, educators' knowledge and skills, and the implementation into classroom instruction.
While this is a really urgent issue, we also have to be patient and supportive of our teachers. They've got to get it right. And so that urgency should drive doing it right and doing it well, not doing it fast.
You just heard Debbie Meyer, a Lelia Bundles Community Scholar at Columbia University and member of the New York State Education Department Dyslexia Dysgraphia Task Force. Today, Meyer joins Dr. Liz Brooke to explore the intersection of dyslexia and the role of universities in changing the trajectory of struggling readers. Here's your host, Liz Brooke.
Thank you for joining us today on the All for Literacy podcast. We come together to connect new and established research with the educators applying those ideas daily in our schools. And as we work to improve access to effective literacy education, it's essential that information and conversation flows both ways, from research to the classroom and from classroom experience back to the researchers. So today I'm joined by Debbie Meyer, a parent, advocate, and a founding member of the New York Reads Coalition. Welcome, Debbie, and thanks for spending some time with me today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Yes. So over the last 2 years or so on the All for Literacy podcast, we've learned that people become passionate about literacy from incredibly diverse backgrounds. So what inspired your interest in literacy and dyslexia advocacy?
Well, we thought we won the lottery when my son was accepted into a public, progressive, diverse school in East Harlem. You know, it was very child-centered. He got to play a lot. And they use play to really teach the kids. And so we thought we won the lottery. I was married to into a dyslexic family. I had no idea what that meant for education. But it was clear my kid was not learning how to read at all. And as he got older, 6, 7, 8 years old, he was really frustrated with school. He, was developing school anxiety and depression about what he couldn't do. And by the time he was 10, there was suicidal ideation and got really, really scary for our family. But, when I look back, and I didn't notice this at the time, but I kept all his publishing party books. He wasn't the only one who was struggling. He was the one that got out of that school. And there were a few other dyslexic kids that got out of that school, but there were a lot of other kids that he left behind.
Yeah. Wow. And so you said at 10, was that when you really dove in and started to get him out of the school?
The summer after third grade, we sent him to Camp Dennebeck. And he jumped a couple grades of reading in just 6 weeks. It was amazing. But he went back to fourth grade and went backwards. And we clearly remember, and there's pictures somewhere in our computer, of his hopes and dreams at the beginning of fourth grade. And they were written in beautiful cursive. And then when they updated their hopes and dreams in January, it was illegible because he had gotten no further support.
Yes.
And that's when we decided we were going to change schools, and we put him into the Windward School for dyslexic students.
Wow. And so for our listeners who might not be familiar, you mentioned Camp Dennebeck and the Windward School. So what was it about, first of all, a camp? You don't often hear about camps being impactful in a student's reading journey. So maybe can you talk about what's different about Camp Dennebeck and how that helped your son?
Yeah, so some of your listeners, if they're into the science of reading, might have heard of Samuel Orton and Anna Gillingham, but they might not have heard of Diana Hanbury King. She actually implemented Anna Gillingham's system of phonics at Sidwell Friends in Washington, D.C., and saw her students, the most struggling students at that school, learn how to read and actually surpass the other students who were being taught with whole language. And she kind of thought, oh, this dyslexia struggling readers thing is over. We know how to do it. But it wasn't. And so she ended up founding Camp Dunnebeck and was instrumental in the founding of the Orton Gillingham Association. And so what they did was they spent 2 weeks training tutors, sometimes teachers, sometimes other people who wanted to be trained in it, the first 2 weeks of summer. And then the kids came, and these tutors then used that 6 weeks to do their practicum, teaching kids how to read. So the tutors were all supervised by other people. The kids had an hour of one-on-one instruction. Then they got to have camp all day. And since it was sleepaway, they had a lot of time to play and make friends. It wasn't a day camp where there was a lot of time in transportation. It was a sleepaway camp. So they had a lot of extra time to do a lot of other fun things. So it didn't feel like summer school at all. It felt like camp. It just happened to have an hour of academics and later on in the afternoon, an hour of practice what you learned that morning.
Great. So applying, and I think for those who have seen the movie Hopeville, we had Harvey and other folks from Hopeville on, but he talks about Diana King, correct? Yes, in that movie. And so I love that idea that because, as you said, because it's sleepaway camp, you have that concentrated time, not only for them to have fun and have summer camp activities, but to have that one-on-one, intensive, again, evidence-based instruction in reading. So Orton Gillingham is, of course, evidence-based. So that's wonderful. Where is Camp Dunnebeck located?
Camp Dunnebeck is in, let's see, they're Rockland or one of those camps 90 minutes north of New York City, one of those counties. They have changed to a different campus than my son went to. But one of the things they did at the campus my son went to, it was in Armenia, is they had a stable of horses. And it was part of their SEL work, because if a kid who struggled to read so much could make a horse do what the kid wanted it to do, they could accomplish anything. So there were these little, I think Isaac was one of the youngest at 8 or 9 years old, but he made a horse do what he wanted to do. And he was like, oh, that's cool. And he also went mountain bike riding, and they had arts and drama. He made some videos. It was a very cool camp. So,
great.
But a lot of camps have been born from this camp. There's a couple in Colorado. There's, I think, one in North and one in South Carolina. So there's other camps. That's not just Camp Dunnebeck, but they were born by counselors and teachers who had gone to Camp Dunnebeck.
Nice. I love that. And so as you've written about how advocating, for your son required you to do a significant amount of learning about how we read, and you've already used many of the phrases that parents might be hearing, but as you dove into all of that research, as a parent, what surprised you as to some of the reasons why maybe your son was struggling to learn to read?
Sorry about that. I was really surprised that teacher prep programs didn't prepare teachers to teach reading. I was also surprised that schools didn't consider kindergarten and first grade reading instruction the most important thing, and put their most talented teachers at kindergarten and first grade.
Right.
So I just saw a lot of problems. And then, I started really learning about what explicit instruction was and how antithetical it was to what my son was getting. And one of this was really apparent. I was watching a documentary on Marva Collins, and she was showing how she taught. And my son looked at it and goes, they don't do that at my school.
Yeah. Well, and I think you mentioned I was one of those first grade teachers who didn't get trained in what I needed to know to teach reading. And I think, oftentimes you hear, even if a school is implementing the science of reading, which we know now, luckily, there's more and more schools starting to adopt evidence-based practices and structured literacy programs. However, they still often focus, to your point, they focus on third grade because that's when the state tests start. So they put their strongest teachers there. But really, we need to be focusing on the pre-K, first grade teachers. But ideally, all of those teachers would be trained in their undergrad programs in the science of reading and understanding. I think for me, the biggest thing for teachers is helping them understand why why certain things are important and how that impacts the child's later reading ability. And as so many teachers have been trained in balanced literacy and whole language, how do we help them make the transition without making them feel blamed? So that's certainly something for sure. Now, when you think about the community and your work, in one of your articles on EdPost, you mentioned that a key part of advocacy is teaching parents, right? So what do parents need to understand about literacy education to be effective advocates for their children and neighborhood schools?
I think they have to know they should trust their gut. If their kid is not reading, there's something going on. And to walk into meetings at the school as an equal with the teachers. There are power plays in those meetings, and they, will call a parent mom or dad. And that's a power play on behalf of the schools. Yes, you are someone's mom. Absolutely. But you are also a full-grown person with expertise in your child. And you should be known for that and feel that that's appropriate. That, I have a friend who is a psychologist that wasn't believed that her kid wasn't reading.
Yeah.
And she said that she suspected dyslexia and still not believed. We told our school that dyslexia ran in our families, and they shut us down.
Yes. Well, and I think a lot of times in schools, the idea that once they diagnose or say that it's dyslexia, right, then they are responsible for providing. Yeah. And so a lot of times in schools, they do try to shut it down. So is there a top 3, top 5 set of questions that you would say to your parents of what should they be asking their schools, right? Because even if they have a gut feeling, right, and I agree, they should trust their gut. What would be some of the questions that you would suggest they start with, so that they feel more informed when they walk into that school meeting?
This is really hard because you don't want every parent to have to understand the science of reading,
right,
or even the law that allows for it. But, just to ask, what's the evidence that this reading program works, right? And evidence is a key word, not research, because there's research on a lot of things.
Right.
But is there evidence and is there an effect size that the program you chose works? What do you do if a kid is already struggling? What systems do you have before special ed? Do you double down on what you're doing? Do you bring in a different program? And what's the evidence for that different program? So I think just talking about evidence is probably better than knowing. You can ask possibly what kind of instruction you use and hear about the pedagogy, but still those are words that a lot of parents don't know. So I think evidence is probably that common word that we know. I think parents should also know they can bring an advocate to a parent-teacher meeting and to an IEP meeting who knows about this stuff, so they don't have to learn about it.
Right.
But
Well,
in
and
general,
I think, yeah,
in general, I think, that there is education law to protect all our kids and to know that they can learn more. So not everyone has to learn about education law, but there are people that specialize it, and a lot of them are free advocates, at least for a little bit. Everyone has to make a living,
Right.
but there are people that know more that can help them.
Yes. Well, and I think even just like you said, but just starting with what reading programs are you using in your classroom? And starting with the names of the program, and then say, can you tell me what the evidence is that these programs work? And I think even, unfortunately, some of the teachers might not know the answer to that question, but at least then, too, the parents can start looking into those programs and seeing if there's any evidence. And then to your point, they can reach out and ask for help from an advocate or someone else. And in some cases, it's the communities. And as we think about, again, things parents can do, and we've talked about some questions they might ask, is there anything that you would think to remind parents as they're going through this process?
Yeah, I want to remind parents and advocates that teachers are people too. They need a lot of practice too. And so while this is a really urgent issue, we also have to be patient and supportive of our teachers. They've got to get it right. And so that urgency should drive doing it right and doing it well, not doing it fast.
I love that. That's so important because, we have to make sure they have the proper training. And we know it's urgent to your point, but we have to make sure they get that training and we get the support. And like I mentioned, we're not trying to blame teachers, right? When you know better, you do better. And a lot of them are doing what they were trained to do in their undergrads. So I love that reminder that parents and advocates need to be patient and supportive of our teachers as they're going through this journey as well. So, how can communities support their teachers, their schools, even the parents as they work to implement more effective literacy education?
I think translating some of the terms is really important, and like assessment and progress monitoring. Do you progress monitor your phone? Because you're going to need the GPS to get to know where you're going. And you look at it and you're like, oh, my battery's really low. I probably shouldn't play on social media for the next 2 hours before I have to use that. Or I have to find a place to charge my phone. That's progress monitoring, right? Do you progress monitor your car? Do you read your gas gauge? Right? And then do you realize, well, one, you should probably go get gas, but two, God, I've been getting really bad mileage for the last couple months. Maybe it's my tires. So to understand that assessment and progress monitoring happen everywhere. It should happen in the doctor's office. You don't want your kid to be 12 years old and you're told that, yeah, they've been behind in their weight and height for the past 12 years. Like, why didn't you tell me that when they were 5?
Right.
You don't want to hear it late. You want to hear it when you can do things about it.
Yes.
So we, should use examples like that to say why assessments are okay, why data is okay, and, translate these things into things all parents can understand. They shouldn't have to be teachers.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's what, you mentioned Emily Hanford's podcast as, she did Sold a Story. And I think that's one of the things that she talks about in that podcast is, parents were suddenly put into the teacher role. And many of them were saying, I don't know if this is how you teach reading, but it doesn't look like my child is reading, right? They're guessing at the words or they're looking at the pictures. So I agree. I don't think we need parents to all be completely fluent with all the different pedagogical terms and all of that, but to have some questions. And I think using those real life examples like you just gave around progress monitoring or ways to do different little checks. And again, going back to that gut feeling at first, right? And then you can do some follow-up and some progress monitoring. And again, continuing on the community theme for a minute, we know that there are impacts of illiteracy that are lifelong. And so how is it changing neighborhoods when we focus on literacy and we increase literacy rates through effective identification and intervention and literacy best practices? Can you point to any communities that are doing a really strong and positive work in that area, and what have been the impacts on the neighborhoods themselves?
I don't know if we have enough data, but I'll tell you a story from a school that I supported to get their teachers trained in 30 to 60 hours of Orton Gillingham by an Orton Gillingham fellow. We walked through the school. It was a very progressive school in Harlem, serving a really diverse mix of kids, diverse socioeconomically and ethnically and racially. It was an amazing school. But when we walked through in 2022, there were kids in the hallway running around. There were kids in the classroom on the floor. Paras were exasperated. The school was using foundations, but they were kind of just using it out of the box. They didn't have a lot of training. So after the training, we walked through it in May of 2023. And same time of day, we were doing the walkthrough. We were going into classes. Every kid was engaged. Most of the kids were engaged, even in the ICT classes, with the gen ed teacher. It was amazing. There were some kids that, were pulled out with the ICT teacher, some kids with the interventionists, but the paras were not redirecting anyone. So just seeing that engagement, and it translated to math, it translated to everything in that school because the teachers knew how to teach. And parents reported that it translated to home because the kids could do what they were asked to do. So, those were really young kids. So, it wasn't really affecting all the community. My husband and I argue whether literacy is the silver bullet to change a community. I think it's at least one of the silver bullets because, if you can't read, you can't vote.
Right.
In New York, our ballot measures are written at, or ballot initiatives are written at 15th to 22nd grade level. And they are put on the ballot, number 1, top left, number 2, bottom left, number 3, top right, number 4, bottom right. And so even if you had worked with someone to understand what you should vote on each initiative, if you didn't know what order they were put in, you might go left to right, like you
Left to
read
right. Yeah.
and vote incorrectly.
Yeah.
So,
that's true.
I mean, it's about democracy. It's about workforce development and economic security and, having that opportunity for college and careers and bolstering your community. But I don't know that we have, that 20 years of teaching literacy right throughout a previously struggling community to actually see it.
Yes. Unfortunately, we don't have that evidence yet. But it's true. Informed decision making, voting, even reading a prescription bottle, making sure that you're giving either your child or yourself the right, prescription and dosage.
Yeah. What if you gave your daughter your husband's medicine?
Right. Yeah. No, I think literacy, I agree. It may not be the only silver bullet, but It is connected, especially as well in schools. About 85% of all content is delivered via reading. So
Yeah.
it doesn't just impact reading, but to your point, it translates in that example you gave in the schools. So
Yeah.
I think it's really important. And I think, again, having the communities get involved, whether it's foundations that can help pay for teacher education and training, as schools try to transition from whole language or balanced literacy, there's going to be a cost in switching curriculum so that, again, communities, businesses can get involved. I think it's really important. So we mentioned at the opening that you are a founding member of the New York Reads Coalition. Can you tell us a little bit about that organization and the work you do there?
Sure. It grew out of our Decoding Dyslexia. And I was asked
And
to
can
lead
you
our...
tell our listeners what
Sure.
Decoding Dyslexia
The
is? Yes.
Decoding Dyslexia is a grassroots movement led by a lot of parents of dyslexic children to create opportunities in public schools for their dyslexic children. And they're doing that by looking at their state policies. In New York, we weren't being very effective. And after I was asked to consider leading it, I asked a group of people involved in it, what if we brought in civil rights organizations and other people that were concerned about literacy and made this bigger than dyslexia? And everyone agreed. And so that's what we did. We just started talking about it. We talked about it to New York Trust New York, or New York Ed Trust New York, NAACP chapters, National Action Network chapters, some Urban League chapters. We needed civil rights organizations involved in this. And so the New York Reads Coalition is bigger, and Ed Trust has actually taken the lead in our policy work. So I think it's been working.
Yes. Well, and I think your point about it's bigger than just students with dyslexia. And I think that Decoding Dyslexia groups around the country, I think, were leading the charge in getting a lot of this legislation passed, and at first focused on whether it was screeners for students with dyslexia or proper instruction and intervention. But then people started realizing this is good instruction, and it's appropriate beyond, it's essential for students with dyslexia, but it's beneficial for all learners and more than just dyslexia. And I think, to your point, getting others involved, I think civil rights, right? Literacy is a civil right. I think that was a great decision, and sounds like it's continuing to be an effective advocate for students. And you were named a Columbia University Amelia Bundles Community Scholar. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How can you tell us a little bit about that honor, and how has that impacted your work in dyslexia advocacy?
Sure. So people in New York know that Columbia's footprint grew tremendously over the past 15 years, 20 years or so, and really taking over a lot of West Harlem, displacing people and displacing their jobs. And so they created a Community Benefits Act. And one of the benefits is that 5 people from Harlem, where I live, get chosen every year to matriculate for 3 years through Columbia as an auditor. We're not making the professors do extra work grading our papers and taking exams, but we have an opportunity to learn and usually to speak in class. So I took classes. I used it. A lot of people used it to learn nonprofit management and learn things to make an organization in Harlem stronger. I really looked at it to figure out the role of the university in ending the dyslexia to prison pipeline. I took a 300 level psychology class called Children at Risk. And they didn't talk about the most common learning disability. And they didn't talk about what social workers and psychologists could do to mitigate this, even though the title of the class was Children at Risk. Another class I took was the history of the English language taught by John McWhorter, who is a linguist, but he taught in the history department as well, a cross-listed class. And that really opened my eyes to what a lot of teachers didn't know and how it impacted how we should teach English. So it was amazing on two levels. One was just how complicated English was, but a lot of that ends with the printing press, right? But
Yes.
It doesn't end with the printing press. It really doesn't. And Dr. McWhorter actually brought in Black English and how that affects teaching English, and how it also kind of parallels the journey that all our New Yorkers here are going through as immigrants to our city, putting their kids in a school system who don't know how to speak English.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was really eye-opening. I got to take a class and meet with professors in public health, in social work. I took classes in the Barnard Education Program and at Teachers College. But I also learned that reading teachers are not alone. The piano teachers and the dance teachers weren't taught how to teach dance or how to teach music. So that was really eye-opening.
You mean they weren't taught about the evidence or best practices or explicit instruction or any of that in relation to playing?
Yeah. And, now I look back and I should have taken like a physical education course. That would have been really interesting to see how phys ed teachers are prepared. But still, we honor practice in music and we honor practice in sports. It's okay if someone goes and practices shooting free throws. It's okay if you sit with your piano and practice and practice and practice. We don't honor it in learning how to read. And a lot of kids really need that extra practice.
That's really interesting. I never thought I'm an athlete growing up, so the free throws resonated with me. But and to your point, it's not only honored, it's mandatory, right? You have practice 2 or 3 or 4 times a week for sports teams, sometimes every day, and piano practice at least a couple of times. But the idea of practice, and in fact, sometimes the reading practice gets put on the back burner for soccer practice or football practice. But that's a really interesting thing, that the homework and or practice in school time, right? Because it's the repetition, building that automaticity, just like you want on the free throws, so that in the game, you don't have to think about it. It's just automatic because you've practiced it so much. So that's really interesting. And thanks for sharing about the Alelia Bundles Community Scholar Award. That sounds like an amazing opportunity that you said 5 folks get each year.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'm doing with it is they really worked on building cohorts and connecting people who might have common interests. And so I get to go back and meet the new people, and other people go back. But I'm working with another community fellow who works in educational gaming, and we're trying to create practice with an app or website that is aligned with the same scope and sequence that they're using in the schools here in New York. And so it would be an opportunity to practice, and your voice could get recorded. It would have a teacher assess something a teacher could log into to see how much practice you did, what games you played. And it's got some social emotional things. The main character is dyslexic, so the player is not. The avatar is. So there's a lot of things that this expert in educational gaming has come up with. And his wife is actually knows how to teach reading well. She went to one of the programs at Fordham, the Cosby program, that taught teachers how to teach reading. And so we're all involved in this. We're looking for funding to scale it and figure out some other things. But it's been kind of fun. And that was a result of being a member of this cohort that I met someone else that I wouldn't have otherwise met.
Wonderful. And bringing in the aspect of gaming, we know that, we want to meet students where they are. And oftentimes that is using some sort of device to play a game, but an educational game.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's wonderful that those connections continue to be made as part of that program. So as we wrap up today, when we think about the challenges in the classroom and trying to move some of these undergrad programs to make sure they are instructing teachers in the science and the evidence. And again, although there's plenty of challenges, there's also tremendous forward momentum. So what makes you most hopeful for the future of literacy, not just in New York, but in the whole country?
Well, one of the other things I'm involved in is a Dyslexia Alliance for Black Children, and really looking at the evidence beyond phonics.
Yes.
Right.
It's
Phonics,
not just
we
phonics.
know phonics is really important. Absolutely.
Yes.
We do a lot of parent workshops to create more advocates. And they're free for all parents to come on. But we also do an annual conference that's coming up end of October, beginning of November. It's virtual. It's after school hours, a Wednesday night, I believe, and a Saturday. So and it's pretty low cost because it's virtual. But Gloria Ladson-Billings is our top speaker because she believed in this as well. And you think of her as this very progressive person, but she knows that kids have to read to be able to enjoy all this other stuff.
Right.
April Baker Bell is speaking as well. So really looking at this and having this conversation that phonics is necessary but not sufficient is really important.
Yes.
And I think that can bring more people in because, we don't have to throw all this baby out with the bathwater. This is important too. And we have to do this well. But the other thing that makes me hopeful is teaching colleges are starting to get on board. And as states change their licensing tests, the teaching colleges will have to respond. Some states are even considering the teaching college accreditation.
Yes.
Should they be in line with the accreditations that the IDA and others put out to make sure that their teachers are coming out of their programs knowing something about how to teach reading?
Absolutely. And IDA, for our listeners, the International Dyslexia Association. So we'll link to that in the show notes. And back to your comment about phonics, that's one of the things. I'm a speech language pathologist as well. And so the language part of the simple view of reading, right? Everybody talks about phonics, but it's phonics times language comprehension, right? So there's so many other elements in that language comprehension bucket. And the product of those two is reflective of a student's reading comprehension ability. But yet most people talk about decoding or reading comprehension, and they leave out that very important language comprehension component. So I love that you're focusing on that as well. And I agree. I think a lot of the teacher certification and college accreditation are going to start to align to the evidence. And so schools and universities are going to have to change their curriculum. So it's all positive movement. And those you said it's a virtual webinar that you are
it's a virtual conference. I can send you the link and put them in the show notes as well.
In the show notes. Yeah, that would be wonderful for folks to attend. And again, that's maybe one of the best things that came out of COVID was that a lot of conferences or learning opportunities are now offered both in person and virtual. So more folks, even if they're not in the New York City area, they can attend and learn from those great speakers you mentioned.
Yeah, we call it DABC, Dyslexia Alliance for Black Children, but it was actually born during COVID. So we were born a national organization.
Oh.
We're working on being kind of multi-local and having ambassadors around the country, but we started out as a national organization. So our work is really, covering the whole country.
Great. And again, we'll put those links in our show notes for folks so they can follow up and learn more, as well as IDA's website, because I think they have a lot of great resources as well for parents and understanding, what questions they might be able to ask either the school or some facts on, some quick facts on dyslexia that they can think about for their own kids. So I just want to thank you, Debbie, for taking the time to talk with us today and sharing some of this great advocacy work that you've been doing, and hopefully given some of our parents out there and even teachers some resources and things to think about. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And as we end today, I always want to thank our listeners for joining Debbie and me today. There is so much we can learn by engaging in these conversations about what we see happening in education and how we can address it. I'd love to hear from our listeners what conversations are happening in your communities today about education. Let us know by joining the conversation on LinkedIn. You'll find our profiles are linked in the show notes. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.